Hi, I'm Rod Chappell. Welcome back to The Rod Chappell Show, where we take legal issues and bring them down to a level where they can be utilized by people in the street every day. For today's topic, that couldn't be a better description if I had written it on the first taping of the show. The idea here is that we've got an issue concerning racial profiling in America and in Missouri, and that there's something that can be done about it. Today, it's my pleasure to have Don Love join us as our guest today. Welcome, Don.
Well, thank you, Rod.
Don, before we start talking about racial profiling and its effects on communities and what can be done about it, tell us about you. Are you affiliated with an organization?
Yes, I'm chair of the Human Rights Task Force of Empower Missouri. Empower Missouri has been around for 110 years or so. Until last year, we were called Missouri Association for Social Welfare. But we decided we needed as old as we were, it was time for a rebirth. So we chose a new name that sounded a little trendier.
I understand.
But we've been working on social justice issues for all that period. We've got a good track history of getting things changed. Like we go back to the idea that school lunches might benefit students.
Wow.
We're older than the NAACP.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And the ASPCA as well, which is saying something because people love their pets.
One of the first leaders of the organization was Roger Baldwin, who got tired of being Mr. Nice Guy and asking people to change the way things were done, and founded the ACLU and started taking people to court to make sure it got done. We've remained nicer than that.
Well, it's kind of.
But we like it. We like both approaches. Sometimes you need a stick to go with the carrots.
It's the truth. It's the truth. And it's funny, as we were talking earlier, sometimes when you sue them, people, you get their attention.
Yeah.
Well, and so what are some of the other issues that Empower Missouri works on?
Well, the racial profiling, the criminal justice, is kind of a tangent. We consider more of our core issues economic. Mm-hmm. Those things that the injustices and the way the economic system that really prevents vulnerable people from living the lives they would like to live.
Like to live. What is there anything that drew you to the work in racial profiling that's led to you becoming the chair?
Well, it was an accident. A member who was in school taking a class had the requirement of applying for a grant, and she applied for something related to human rights and got $5,000. Mm-hmm. And then we had to decide what to do about it. And one of the ideas that was offered was to look at racial profiling or bias-based policing, mm-hmm. and see if we could find a good way to spend $5,000. We found a law professor, David Harris from University of Pittsburgh Law School, mm-hmm. who was a nationally known expert, and he was willing to come and speak in Missouri. Mm-hmm. We organized groups in St. Louis, Columbia, Jeff City, Springfield, and Kansas City to set up a panel to hear what he had to say and respond. You were one of those panelists here in Jeff City. And that got us started. That what he told us made sense. It impressed us as something that could be addressed. He recommended at the time that one of the best things to do was to use the data in Missouri's vehicle stop report, mm-hmm. which records all of the actions that officers take while they make traffic stops, broken down by race and ethnic groups. So you can look and see exactly what they're doing and look for disparities. And he suggested we look at especially consent searches, mm-hmm. that he thought those would be one of the best indicators possible that minorities were being treated differently than the majority white population.
Okay.
Consent searches, I usually have to explain to white audiences, but seldom have to explain to minority audiences. And that in itself tells you something.
Something's wrong, yeah.
That they occur when an officer doesn't have any clear-cut reason to do anything else in a stop. Mm-hmm. that they're generally routine, although there are exceptions to that. And the officer has taken care of whatever the problem was, like speeding or running a light or whatever like that. And he has, or she has some sense that, well, boy, there's something else here I ought to find out, ought to do. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason not to ask for consent. The courts have said that officers aren't allowed to do a search without probable cause unless the driver in this case says, oh yeah, okay, you can search my car.
Now, I've got a little analogy. I don't know how well it fits. You tell me. So if somebody on the street came up and took my wallet, right, that would be a problem. That might be a crime, and that might be analogous to an officer or a peace officer essentially searching without consent where there was no probable cause. But if they say, hey, can I have your wallet, and I give it to them, then that's a whole different story. Is that about right?
Are you inferring there might be some coercion involved?
There could be.
Give me your wallet or I'm going to hit you over the head.
Or let me search your car. Or, and who knows what the force of that next or what might happen.
Well, officers tend to, I think, just not be aware of that coercive factor. Mm-hmm. But drivers, I think, no matter what race, when they're once they've been stopped and they're compelled to follow the orders the officers are giving them, tend to experience some degree of perhaps coercion is too strong, but boy, I sure don't have any choice about what I'm doing here.
Right.
And when it's applied to a situation where the Constitution says you should be free from searches without probable cause, mm-hmm. Yet here's this officer saying, oh, we're sure worried about drug dealing so close to that school over there, and mm-hmm. I'd sure like to be reassured that you're not one of those people.
Right.
There becomes a strong, there's a little bit of an exclamation point that's hard to ignore if you're, and the more vulnerable you are, mm-hmm. The more you're likely to say yes. And that's why, again, going back to white people don't know what consent searches are, because I think they tend not to get asked. Someone like me, middle class, mm-hmm. white, male, senior citizen, mm-hmm. It's just not likely to happen.
Right.
And if it did, I'm likely to say no.
Right. Might have some feeling about that too, and then maybe somebody else would hear about it.
On the other hand, if you're a teenager and you're trying to get to work on time, and you know that that officer can keep you sitting around for quite a while if, mm-hmm. if he or she cares to, and you're intimidated to begin with, mm-hmm. and you don't know what your rights are, then you're much more likely to give in and say yes. Mm-hmm. And then what happens to you if, you picked up a hitchhiker the week before, or some friend that really isn't your friend, and mm-hmm. happened to lose something in your car that he shouldn't have had in the first place, and you had no idea it was there.
Right.
Then you face the full brunt of the violation of a drug charge or weapons charge or whatever. When in point of fact you hadn't done anything wrong except probably say yes, you can search my car. Right. That was the mistake right there.
That is. And I've talked to a lot of younger people, some at the college, some in high school, who, when confronted, and not necessarily confronted in a mean way or a bad way, but when they come into an encounter with law enforcement who typically looks like law enforcement, they have a uniform which commands some respect, but also they have a stun gun, they may have a billy club, they may have, flashlights and a gun and handcuffs, and of course there is a command presence that I think is often utilized by law enforcement. That with a backdrop of the history of those people with the encounters that they know occur with law enforcement, whether or not they personally experienced how bad those can go. And are worried about those, and that can add to a person's willingness to allow a search of their vehicle, even when they, quote unquote, haven't done anything wrong or just trying to do what they're supposed to be doing. I just bring that up because that could be another factor on why people who historically have been disenfranchised and haven't had a lot of political clout, let alone economic resources, may be more inclined to go along with a request that, although legal, might not necessarily do the best to protect the individual's interests.
Yeah. Well, I think we certainly have to look at the historic background here. Yeah. That we live in a society in which legally human beings could be owned black by white, right. Never the other way around, right. To my knowledge.
Right.
The law was used to maintain those property rights as long as possible. Mm-hmm. We fought a long and bloody war to change that law. It was difficult to pass any other laws that would give equality to the races. Mm-hmm. Eventually, they were passed, but almost immediately began to be ignored in probably all states to one degree or another, but especially in the South, mm-hmm. to the point thinking about Selma, because that we're yes. having an anniversary now, mm-hmm. to the point where African Americans were finally saying 50 years ago that no, we want to vote now.
Right.
Constitution says we should be able to vote. Why can we not go to the courthouse and register? Mm-hmm. And not only could they not go to the courthouse, but they couldn't march,
right.
Couldn't complain,
mm-hmm.
couldn't do much of anything, mm-hmm. because the police were instructed to enforce laws differentially for them. Certain things they simply could not do.
Right.
And the police were the ones that made that stick.
That's
They
right.
were the ones with the billy clubs. They were the ones with the dogs. They were doing what the politicians, what the people in charge, those with power, economic and otherwise, mm-hmm. were telling them to do. And that remains part of the equation. That if your grandfather was mistreated by the police for something that wasn't illegal 50 or 60 years ago, that's going to be part of what you grew up hearing, mm-hmm. and it's going to affect the way you think about police officers today, even though those police officers today aren't thinking those things.
Right.
Very few of them, I think, have any sense of that it's right for the laws to be applied differently on the basis of skin color.
That's right.
Most officers are fairly young, after all. They grew up with a much less biased point of view than I did, as someone born in that period, born in 60, close to 70 years ago now, living in a segregated community, never seeing professional black people,
right.
Never playing with a black person on a school team, or almost never playing against a black kid. Mm-hmm. And it was just, it's hard for an officer, 20-something, coming up in the ranks today to think back on, could you really have grown up like that? Because they didn't grow up. They grew up with black friends and being comfortable with equality. So from the officer's point of view, this is something that if it's not passed, they want it to be passed.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I think gives us a tremendous advantage right now in changing these things. Mm-hmm. We can change the attitudes. We can, if there is a problem with the way people are treated on the basis of color during stops, mm-hmm. We can identify it from or at least the strong possibility of it from the data we have. We can sit down together and say, yes, there's a problem here, and then follow through by lining out exactly what needs to be done to get past that, so we can finally enter a situation in which people are treated equally, regardless of racial heritage or ethnic background or skin color or any of those other things that might be a problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what we're talking about. Constitutional violations based on color. The ability of Americans, wherever they may be, in Missouri or other states, to travel and engage in commerce, to do all the things that we as American citizens have envisioned underneath the Constitution and as a part of our citizenship. We're going to come back, and hopefully in another segment, if you've got time, Don, I'd like to talk more about some of the things that we can do as Americans to make sure that this doesn't keep on happening. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Angela Hirsch.
And I'm Heidi Lucas.
We're with Central Missouri Community Action, a nonprofit organization dedicated to alleviating poverty in mid-Missouri through programs like Head Start, energy assistance, Section 8 housing assistance, and employment and training.
Our mission is to empower individuals and families to achieve self-reliance. We engage the community to address the causes and conditions of poverty through organizing efforts, outreach and education, and community development.
Find us online at www.showmeaction.org and like us on Facebook.
Join us in ensuring that our community is a thriving, vibrant, and safe place to live for all families.
Hi, and welcome back to the Rod Chappell Show. This is the second segment that we're talking about racial profiling with our friend Don Love. In the first segment, we reviewed some of the functional, systematic issues in ensuring that the constitutional rights of Americans are not abridged. Or let's say that a different way. That what we really looked at were some inequalities based on race that American citizens are facing even today. We ended the segment talking about Selma and the ability of people to vote in line with the requirements of the Constitution. And here we're talking about another constitutional right that we as American citizens have, which is simply to travel on the roads, to go to and fro, to engage in commerce, to actually fulfill America's dream. But in order to do that, you've got to be able to get someplace that you're going. Happily, we have Don Love, and I was hoping that we could talk a little bit about some of the things that might be done to allow us to engage in those constitutional rights, to stop racial profiling. Do you have any ideas? Or how many ideas do you have might be the better one.
Narrow that down. In the last, something more than 10 years, this has become an issue and been pretty well settled in some regards. Mm-hmm. That there was a period when police were trying very hard to find drugs being moved on the highways. Mm-hmm. And in, I think, New Jersey, they discovered that they could find some drugs by looking for black drivers and stopping them. FBI or the Department of Justice looked at that and said, no, you can't do that. That, yeah, it may be that you can find some drugs that way, but you're going to end up stopping a lot of people that you shouldn't stop simply because of their skin color. Mm-hmm. That if you happen to know that a specific person who is identified as being 5'11", 160 pounds, black-skinned, mm-hmm. Has done something wrong, then you can look for that person. That the skin color is a descriptor that's valid to use in that situation. But just going out and assuming that because someone has a non-white skin makes it okay to make a stop on the assumption that, well, more of those people are going to be having drugs than not, it simply is not, it's probably not true in the first place, and even if it were true, it wouldn't be permitted because the Constitution treats us as individuals regardless of skin color. Mm-hmm. So law was established that no, that wasn't acceptable. But there's still in a lot of more subtle situations, it's very difficult for virtually anybody to get around the idea that because of stereotypes in our society, mm-hmm. that, for instance, a young black man isn't more likely to be committing crimes. I think there's some famous African American who apologized for being tempted to cross the street when he saw a young black man coming his way.
Right.
It's a stereotype that applies to all of us, and if we can't tell for sure that someone is safe to pass on the street, we're going to take steps to protect ourselves. But still, if when we have professionals trained to do law enforcement, we expect more of them.
Right.
They need to be able to, as they go about detecting crime, make sure that when they interact with people, they're interacting on the basis of the facts they know that indicate a crime might have been committed before they do anything. Just screening people for skin and then skin color and then looking for other signs a crime might have been committed is unacceptable. They have to look first for those other things.
Right.
If they stop a driver and the behavior of the driver, regardless of skin color, makes them think, I'm suspicious of this person. I think this person is hiding something.
Right.
I mean, if they can really honestly say to themselves that my suspicions here aren't guided by whatever stereotypes I may have inherited from our segregated culture, then acting on that suspicion is probably okay.
Right.
But if, insofar as they're more prone to think that a person with dark skin is more likely to be committing that crime, then they need to think twice about what they're doing.
Right.
They need to do a gut check. They need to go back and say to themselves, now, would I do this if this person were white? And if they can't honestly say to themselves, to reassure themselves that my basic integrity is intact,
Right.
in this case, that yes, I realize I could have been influenced by the stereotypes, but because in this situation where there was no imminent danger, it's just a routine traffic stop where I've taken care of the basic problem that was there, and now I'm thinking, is there something a little more subtle going on, that the officer has a chance to do that gut check and think twice, and then say, no, I think I'm being influenced by those the stereotypes that are so common. And if in that situation, officers would make that part of their routine, I think we'd see a lot of the problems with the traffic stops go away. And once officers get used to doing that gut check in that situation, it's going to be easier for them to recognize the stereotypes that are influencing them in other situations, and learn to keep them under control. Now, there's still going to be situations where they know someone has a gun, or they have a strong suspicion that someone has a gun, or someone is acting in a threatening manner to them, and they don't have that chance to sit back and say, oh, are my stereotypes kicking? We can't expect that of them.
Yeah,
in that situation, they have to rely on the muscle learning that they've experienced during training, and respond in a way that keeps them safe and keeps bystanders safe as much as possible.
Right.
Now, we need to make sure that training is really the best possible and isn't getting them to situations that unnecessarily put even the supposed perpetrator at risk. I mean, there is an obligation to protect everybody here, even those that may be in the process of committing a crime.
Right.
After all, we, especially thinking of young people growing up, lots of us have done things that could have been considered criminal at one point in our lives, and if we survived, it's not because we were any better than the next guy.
Right.
Basically lucky, and
That's right. And that's,
if we give these, we don't want people killed, 18-year-olds killed because they're doing foolish things.
right, which 18-year-olds are prone to do. You
They
know.
will grow up, they will be good citizens,
Yep.
they will live down that history of a mistake they made as an 18-year-old, but would sure rather have them alive and growing into that mature adulthood than to have funerals. And especially when those funerals end up affecting a certain segment of culture based on skin color,
Right.
it's unacceptable.
That's right. That's right. You know, these taking a routine traffic stop or the opportunity to have one, whether or not probable cause is there, and then turning that into something else, you know, with the consent search, is one thing, but it's that it's along that continuum that we run into a lot of problems where, because of the same thing that would allow an individual who's a peace officer to either stop a person based on their color or ask for a search based on their color, there are also some other assumptions about whether or not this person is a dangerous person, right? That they may be inclined to make, and that could actually result in the person's injury, unnecessary arrest, or even death in some circumstances, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why racial profiling has got to be no longer a back burner issue. Let me ask you, I know there's been legislation to talk about it. There's some pending on the federal level, I think. We've had some here in Missouri. Nothing is passed at this point. Is this something that could be affected by an executive order from the governor?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. I think there are a lot of things that that can be tweaked fairly easily. We have a racial profiling law that makes some basic requirements. I think the tendency has been to give local police departments as much autonomy as possible.
Okay.
That we give them some basic level guidance on what they have to do, the minimum requirements, and there probably isn't much more that can be done. The area where it's probably possible to do the most is with the training that's made available. That there are some requirements, that minimum levels of training that officers get. That training could either be training that in which 300 officers enter a room, there are ample coffee and other refreshments, and they listen to a lecture they've heard every 3 years for the past 12 years, and they read the paper and drink coffee, and when it's over, they go out and do exactly as they've been doing. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there's some really quality training programs that address the sorts of issues that we would like to have addressed, that the attitudes that they may unknowingly have about members of the community that they're doing law enforcement for based on skin color.
Okay.
There are 2 officers break.
Yeah. And I think that is one of the issues that we'll hope to address. And I don't know how your time's looking, Don, but if you've got time for one more segment, we may talk about some of the qualities of the training that we're talking about.
I think that would be a good topic to address.
Let's do it. Please join us again on another segment of The Rod Chappell Show.